The peaceful morning light filtered through the atmosphere regulators on New Horizon, casting a golden glow over the research settlement. 12-year-old Jin Ha adjusted her sample collection kit, excitement bubbling as she ventured into the valley where strange blue crystals had appeared after the last meteor shower. Her parents, both terraforming scientists, had finally allowed her to explore beyond the settlement perimeter, but not too far, they had warned. Just over that ridge and back before lunch, her mother had said, adjusting Jin's environmental suit. The sensors will track you the whole time. Jin hummed to herself as she collected her samples, carefully labeling each one as her science teacher had taught her. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't notice when she crossed the invisible boundary that separated human territory from the zone claimed by the Galactic Hegemony. To her, it was just another few steps up an interesting rock formation. The E-3 Hegemony patrol ships appeared silently in the sky above, their sleek forms reflecting the morning sun. They had detected an unauthorized biological signature in restricted space. According to Protocol 557B, all intrusions were to be eliminated without exception or warning. It did not matter that the signature was small, indicating a juvenile form. The hegemony had maintained its iron grip over 1,000 star systems through absolute enforcement of its boundaries. From the research settlement, Jin's father looked up from his workstation when the proximity alarms began to sound. His eyes moved to the tracking display showing Jin's position, then to the unidentified craft suddenly appearing above her location. Horror dawned on his face as he recognized the distinctive silhouette of hegemony enforcement vessels. "No," he whispered, reaching for the emergency communicator. "She's just a child." But the hegemony vessels had already powered up their weapons. The lead ship fired a precision beam that struck exactly where Jin stood. The ground erupted in a blinding flash, leaving nothing but scorched earth where a curious child had been, collecting rocks moments before. Earth's monitoring satellites positioned to track hegemony movements near human territories captured everything. The unprovoked attack, the complete disintegration of the small environmental suit, the hegemony ships calmly departing afterward, mission complete. Within hours, the footage began spreading across human networks. Parents watched in horror as someone's daughter was obliterated for the crime of crossing an invisible line. Workers in orbital factories paused their machines. Soldiers in training grounds across Earth fell silent. In government chambers worldwide, officials who had been arguing moments before found themselves united in stunned silence as the recording played on repeat. The hegemony, following standard procedure, transmitted a message to Earth's United Planetary Council. Border enforcement action completed at coordinates 227-308. Human intrusion eliminated. Further violations will result in escalated response. In the hegemony's 10,000-year history of expansion, this approach had never failed. Species either retreated from claimed territories or submitted to hegemony rule after such demonstrations. Their databases held no record of any other outcome. What they failed to understand, what their extensive studies of conquered species had never prepared them for, was the unique human response to the death of a child. In the small apartment where Jin's parents had lived, neighbors gathered in silent support. Her mother sat motionless, staring at Jin's empty bed with its collection of stuffed animals and hand-drawn pictures of planets she had hoped to visit someday. Her father clutched Jin's school badge, its cheerful blue light still blinking, indicating a student in good standing. Across Earth and its colonies, something unprecedented was happening. Nations that had fought bitter wars for centuries were opening direct diplomatic channels. Military commanders who had been enemies were now sharing information. Industrial plants began retooling without waiting for official orders. In the UN Security Council, normally filled with careful diplomatic language and political maneuvering, the tone was different. The representative from the European Federation stood, her voice steady despite the tears on her face. "They killed a child who was collecting rocks," she said simply. "They killed her and thought we would accept this as normal. They don't understand what they've done." 3 days after Jin's death, the hegemony sent what they considered a routine ultimatum, demanding Earth's formal recognition of all hegemony territorial claims and the immediate cessation of all military activities. They expected immediate compliance. Instead, they received silence as humanity prepared its response. On the memorial wall hastily erected outside the United Planetary Council building, someone had projected an image of Jin smiling at her last school ceremony. Beneath it, handwritten notes and flowers piled higher each hour. Among them was a simple message that would soon become humanity's rallying cry. They didn't know who they were provoking. They will learn. At the orbital shipyards, retired Admiral Lee Sun watched the massive fleet assembling. Ships that normally competed for trade routes now flew matching insignias, Earth's blue globe against a field of stars. His aide approached with a data tablet showing the latest intelligence on hegemony fleet positions. "They still don't believe we're serious," the young officer said. "Their analysts say our response is emotionally driven and strategically insignificant." Admiral Lee nodded slowly, watching as another dreadnought moved into formation. "That's good," he said quietly. "Let them keep thinking that way until it's too late." In the mountain facility, where Earth's most dangerous weapons had been locked away by international treaty, Director Kim ran her security badge through the final clearance scanner. The massive vault doors began to open for the first time in 30 years. "For Jin," she whispered, "for all our children." The hegemony was about to learn why humanity had never needed to conquer the stars to be feared among them. The silence from Earth confused the hegemony tacticians. Their records showed that species typically responded to ultimatums with either immediate surrender or desperate, disorganized resistance. Yet 5 days after their deadline passed, human representatives had made no contact. The hegemony emperor's advisors assured him this was merely human indecision, an emotional species paralyzed by fear. They were catastrophically wrong. Across Earth, an unprecedented transformation was underway. Factory floors that had produced civilian vehicles now assembled military-grade armor plating. Shipyards worked around the clock, their scaffolding lit up against the night sky as workers refused to leave their posts. Nations quietly moved their most advanced weapons into shared command structures without the usual political negotiations. In his small mountain home, Admiral Lee Sun was preparing tea when the communication alert sounded. He recognized the presidential seal immediately. "I was wondering when you'd call," he said, settling into his chair. The image of President Cho appeared on screen, the bags under her eyes revealing sleepless nights. "We need you back, Admiral," Lee took a slow sip of his tea. "I've been retired for 8 years, and in those 8 years no one has developed your understanding of hegemony tactics. No one else turned a hopeless battle at Europa Station into a victory." Lee closed his eyes briefly, memories of that desperate fight washing over him. "That was different. We were just protecting a mining operation." "And now?" the president asked quietly. Lee placed his cup down. On his wall hung a photo from the memorial service for Jin Ha, a child he'd never met, but whose face now represented billions of humans united in grief and resolve. "I'll be at command within 6 hours." At the same time, deep beneath the rocky fountains, Director Kim Han stood before the assembled team of Earth's top weapons scientists. On the display wall behind her played silent footage of the hegemony attack that killed Jin. "For decades, we've kept our most advanced weapons sealed away, fearing they'd trigger an arms race," she said, her voice steady. "That concern is now irrelevant. Project Sunbreak is active as of this moment." A scientist in the front row spoke up. "Director, the gravitational manipulation technology isn't stable enough for deployment. We've only run simulations." "Then, you'll perfect it during the journey," Kim replied. "Every ship in the fleet will be equipped with prototype systems within 2 weeks." "That's impossible." "No," Kim said firmly. "What's impossible is explaining to humanity why we held back our strongest defenses while children die. Get it done." The hegemony's vast intelligence network finally began reporting unusual activities. Human satellites were being repositioned. Communication patterns had changed dramatically. Most concerning were thermal readings, showing massive energy expenditures at known military facilities. In the hegemony war room, Fleet Commander Draz reviewed these reports with growing irritation. "They're positioning their minimal defense fleet near their home planet," he noted. "Typical primitive response. Protect the homeworld at all costs." His tactical officer looked less certain. "Sir, Some of these energy signatures don't match anything in our database on human technology. They've had less than 3 centuries of spaceflight, Draz dismissed with a wave. Their entire fleet is 1/20th the size of just our peacekeeping armada. Whatever they're planning, it's symbolic at best. Meanwhile, in orbit around Mars, Captain Park Jun watched as engineers installed the experimental propulsion system on his ship. His vessel was old, a battle-scarred defender that had protected Earth's colonies for 15 years. Now it gleamed, with new armor plates and weapon systems. "Will it work?" he asked the lead engineer who was attaching power conduits with practiced hands. "The phase shift drive uses principles we've only recently understood," she replied without looking up. "But when it works, you'll be able to move in ways the hegemony will think violate physics itself." Park placed his hand on the hull. "And if it doesn't work?" The engineer finally paused, meeting his eyes. "Then we die knowing we tried everything possible." In training facilities across Earth, soldiers practiced with newly developed powered armor suits. Sergeant Do-Yun crashed to the ground as his suit locked up mid-jump. "Damn it," he shouted, struggling to reset the system. His commanding officer helped him up. "The neural interface is sensitive. You're thinking too hard about each movement. Let it become an extension of yourself." Do tried again, focusing on feeling rather than thinking. This time he leapt 30 feet into the air, landing with precision that would have been impossible for an unaugmented human. "Better," his commander nodded. "Now imagine using that against hegemony troops who've never faced anything like it." A fierce grin spread across Do's face as he imagined justice for Jin. On the moon base, Admiral Lee walked through the massive underground hangar where Earth's unified fleet gathered. Ships that once belonged to competing nations now flew under. A single banner, Earth's blue globe against a field of stars. "How many?" he asked his aide. 317 combat-ready vessels, sir. Another 85 will join before we launch." Lee nodded. Against the hegemony's thousands, it was still a small force, but numbers had never told the full story of human conflict and the special weapons systems. Director Kim reports the first prototypes are operational. They're being installed on the frontline ships now. Lee stopped before the viewport, looking out at Earth hanging in the black sky. Somewhere on that blue planet was the family of a child who would never come home. Somewhere were parents whose grief had united humanity like nothing in history. "Send a message to all ships," Lee said quietly. "We launch in 3 days. Sir, the hegemony is assembling what they call a pacification fleet. Intelligence suggests they'll reach our solar system in 5 days. Lee's expression didn't change. "Good. Let them come to us first." From the hegemony capital, Emperor Naven watched recordings of human military preparations with mild curiosity. "They think they can challenge us?" he asked, amusement evident in his voice. "We conquered the Drell when they had twice the fleet size of these humans." His chief strategist bowed respectfully. "True, Emperor, but there's something unusual about their response. They've shown no fear, no diplomatic overtures, no offers of tribute to appease us. Perhaps they require a more severe demonstration," the Emperor suggested. "Dispatch our pacification fleet. Let them see the futility of resistance before we arrive in force." As the hegemony fleet prepared for departure, they remained unaware that they were not bringing war to Earth. They were merely meeting it halfway. The hegemony pacification fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system, a massive formation of sleek warships, arranged in perfect geometric patterns. Their hulls gleamed with an alien sheen, absorbing rather than reflecting the distant sunlight. To the hegemony commanders, this was a routine operation, a show of overwhelming force that would lead to the predictable surrender of yet another species. Ahead of them floated what appeared to be a scattered, disorganized defense. Human vessels of various shapes and sizes hung in space, seemingly positioned without tactical consideration. Some were clearly repurposed civilian craft, others older military models with visible battle scars. The hegemony tactical officers chuckled at the primitive display. "They've gathered their toys to face us," Commander Draz remarked with a dismissive wave of his four-fingered hand. "Begin standard intimidation protocols." The flagship's communication officer transmitted the ultimatum, his voice carrying the practiced tone of one who had delivered such messages dozens of times before. "Attention, human defenders. You face the might of the galactic hegemony. You have one planetary rotation to surrender your world and accept our terms. Resistance will result in your complete annihilation. The expected response, panicked pleas, desperate negotiations, or immediate surrender, did not come. Instead, the human ships remained silent, drifting almost lazily in the void. "They're stunned into silence," one of Draz's lieutenants suggested. As expected. Aboard the Earth vessel Defiant, Captain Park June stood motionless on the bridge, watching the enemy formation through the main viewport. His ship, once a dependable but unremarkable defense cruiser, now housed technology that no human had dreamed possible just weeks ago. "All ships confirm phase shift drives are green," his first officer reported, voice steady despite the tension crackling through the air. "Gravitational disruptors primed and locked." Park nodded, remembering the words of Admiral Lee during their final briefing. "They believe we're primitive. Let them keep believing it until the moment we prove otherwise." The captain's hand rested on a small pocket containing a chip with Jin Ha's school photo, a reminder of why they fought. Not for territory or resources, but for justice that transcended. "Star systems, signal the fleet," Park ordered. "Execute Operation Thunderclap on my mark." When Earth's deadline for surrender passed, the hegemony vessels began to advance, weapons charging. Commander Draz settled into his command chair, preparing to oversee yet another routine subjugation. "Sir," his sensor officer called out, confusion evident in his voice, "I'm detecting unusual energy signatures from the human vessels. Something's—" The officer never finished his sentence. The human ships suddenly vanished from their positions, leaving the hegemony sensors scrambling to locate them. Before the alien crew could react, the Defiant materialized directly alongside their flagship, so close that crew members on both ships could see each other through viewports. "Impossible," Draz shouted, rising from his chair. "No species has developed short-range teleportation." "Not teleportation," his science officer corrected, voice trembling. "They've somehow bent space itself." Throughout the hegemony formation, human ships appeared where they shouldn't be, inside defensive perimeters, between tight formations, even directly above capital ships. The phase shift technology allowed them to move not by conventional propulsion, but by briefly shifting into another dimension, before re-emerging precisely where they wanted to be. The Defiant fired its primary weapon, not a conventional energy beam, but a gravitational disruptor that warped space-time around its target. The hegemony flagship's hull began to buckle, not from external force, but from within, as if the very atoms were trying to move in different directions. "All ships, open fire," Park commanded. Across the battlefield, human vessels unleashed weapons the hegemony had never encountered. Some created localized gravitational singularities that tore through alien hulls. Others fired precision electromagnetic pulses that disabled hegemony systems, while leaving human technology unaffected. On the hegemony command cruiser, alarms blared as systems failed throughout the ship. "They're targeting our drive cores," an engineer shouted over the chaos. "Structural integrity failing in sections 7 through 13. Commander Draz stared in disbelief at his tactical display as it showed ship after ship going dark. How could these primitives, these barely spacefaring apes, possess technology that rivaled or even exceeded the hegemonies? "Launch all fighters," he ordered. "Surround them with numbers." Thousands of small attack craft poured from hegemony carriers, swarming toward the human vessels. But Earth had prepared for this too. Sergeant Doyun led his boarding team as they launched from the Defiant in sleek insertion pods. Each soldier wore powered armor that amplified their strength, speed, and reflexes tenfold. The suit's neural interfaces responded to thought as much as movement, making them extensions of the wearers' bodies rather than mere equipment. "Remember Jin Ha," Du said to his team as their pods accelerated toward a hegemony destroyer. "Remember why we fight." When they breached the alien hull, the hegemony crew faced something they had never encountered in 10,000 years of conquest. Human soldiers moving with impossible speed, shrugging off energy weapon impacts, and fighting with a ferocity born of righteous fury. Du crashed through a bulkhead, sending 2 hegemony guards flying. His suit's enhanced sensors highlighted vital ship systems, allowing him to target critical components with precision. Behind him, his team secured corridors and junctions with practiced efficiency. "They fight like nothing I've ever seen," A-Tai, Hegemony security officer, transmitted to his command post before the communication was cut short. From his command chair, Commander Draz watched as nearly half his fleet was disabled or destroyed in less than 30 minutes. Ships that attempted to retreat found their navigation systems mysteriously malfunctioning, keeping them trapped in the battle zone. "Send a distress call to the Imperial fleet," Draz ordered, his voice hoarse. Tell them we face demons." As his communications officer complied, a single human soldier appeared on the bridge, a woman whose armor bore the insignia of Earth's unified command. She removed her helmet, revealing eyes that burned with determination. "Your flagship will be allowed to leave," she announced, her voice carrying no hint of negotiation. "You will deliver our message to your leaders." "What message?" Draz asked, suddenly aware of his own mortality in a way no hegemony commander had felt in generations, that the child you murdered had a name, Jinha, and that we're coming for those responsible. Throughout the battle zone, human forces systematically disabled or destroyed all but one hegemony vessel. As the flagship limped away toward hegemony space, its databanks filled with recordings of the devastating defeat, Admiral Lee watched from his command center on Earth's moon. "They'll send more ships," his aide observed quietly. "Let them come," Lee replied. "We'll be waiting. And now they know what happens when you harm our children." As the remaining hegemony vessel disappeared into hyperspace, it carried with it something the Empire had never experienced before: fear. Not the fear they so casually instilled in others, but something deeper and more primal, the realization that they had awakened something that would not stop until justice was served. For the first time in 10,000 years, the hegemony would learn what it meant to be hunted. The news of the devastating defeat reached the hegemony capital world 3 days later, carried by the lone surviving vessel of what had been their mightiest pacification fleet. The ship limped into orbit around the gleaming planet Noxar, its hull scarred and systems barely functioning. Emperor Naven watched the battle recordings in stunned silence, surrounded by his most trusted advisors in the Imperial viewing chamber. None dared speak as the images played out. Human ships appearing where they shouldn't be able to exist, weapons that defied known physics, and soldiers in powered armor tearing through hegemony defenses like they were made of paper. "Impossible," the Emperor finally whispered, his voice shaking slightly. In 10,000 years of rulership, Naven had never known fear. Until now, Commander Draz, his once pristine uniform now torn and stained, knelt before the Emperor. "They allowed us to escape, Your Luminance. They wanted us to bring you their message, which is that the child we killed had a name, Jin Ha, and that they're coming for those responsible." Draz swallowed hard. "They're coming here." The Emperor rose from his throne, moving to the vast window overlooking the capital city. Towers of crystalline material stretched toward the sky, homes to billions of citizens who had never known war on their own soil. "How many ships do these humans have?" he asked. The Imperial Intelligence Director stepped forward with a data tablet. "Our latest estimates suggest fewer than 500 combat vessels, Your Luminance. We command over 12,000. And yet they destroyed an entire pacification fleet, with what appears to be only a fraction of their forces," Naven observed. "Numbers mean nothing if their technology surpasses ours so dramatically." For the first time in living memory, panic began to spread through the hegemony leadership. The War Minister suggested immediately deploying the entire Imperial fleet to Earth. The Commerce Guild proposed offering unprecedented trade concessions. The Diplomatic Corps recommended formal apologies and reparations for the border incident. Ven silenced them all with a wave of his hand. "You still don't understand. These humans don't want our surrender or our riches." He pointed to the frozen image of a human soldier on the screen, eyes burning with determination. "Look at them. They want justice." In the following days, the Emperor ordered the evacuation of civilian populations from outlying systems, the activation of ancient defensive technologies, and the recall of every available military vessel to form a defensive perimeter around the hegemony core worlds. Meanwhile, Admiral Lee's Vengeance fleet carved a surgical path through hegemony space. They bypassed heavily populated planets, focusing their attacks on military installations, shipyards, and command centers. Each precision strike further demoralized the hegemony forces, who had never faced an enemy that could appear without warning inside their most secure facilities. On the bridge of the human flagship Defiant, Captain Park studied tactical displays, showing their progress toward the hegemony homeworld. "Another defensive line has broken," his first officer reported. "They didn't even attempt to engage us this time. They just ran." Park nodded, feeling no satisfaction in the enemy's fear. "This isn't about vengeance for its own sake. It's about making sure no child ever suffers Jinha's fate again." Behind him, Admiral Lee entered the bridge. The old veteran carried the weight of Earth's unified military on his shoulders, yet moved with purpose and clarity. "The Emperor has sent a communication," Lee announced, his voice even. "He wishes to negotiate terms." "What terms could possibly satisfy humanity now?" Park asked. "That's not for us to decide," Lee replied, nodding toward the diplomatic vessel, traveling alongside the Defiant. Aboard that ship, Jinha's parents, Min and Su, were preparing for a meeting none of them had ever imagined. Back on the hegemony capital, Emperor Na-Ven paced in his private chambers, something he had never done before. The feeling that gripped him was entirely new, a cold sensation in his chest, a tightness in his breathing. "Is this what fear feels like?" he wondered aloud. His oldest advisor, who had served 3 emperors before him, nodded slowly. "The ancient texts speak of it, from before we became the dominant power in the galaxy." Na-Ven turned to his security feeds, watching as citizens crowded onto evacuation transports. The human fleet had destroyed every early warning system in the outer system. They could appear at any moment. "How did we misjudge them so badly?" The Emperor asked. "Our intelligence reports classified them as primitive, aggressive but technologically inferior. We studied their weapons, their ships, their political systems," the advisor replied. "But we failed to understand something more fundamental about them, which is that humans will unleash every ounce of their creativity, will break every limit and rule they've established for themselves when protecting their young." The old advisor's voice trembled. "We killed a child, and in doing so we didn't just make enemies of the parents, we made enemies of an entire species." Throughout the capital, the sense of impending doom grew. Military officials who had dismissed humans as barely worth studying now frantically searched records for any weakness, any vulnerability that might be exploited. Scientists examined the limited data on human technology, trying to understand how they had achieved such advances in mere weeks. The Emperor's most trusted seer, a being who had guided hegemony expansion for centuries through her ability to glimpse probable futures, collapsed after attempting to foresee the outcome of the human advance. "I saw nothing but darkness," she whispered when revived. "They have changed the path of the galaxy itself." 3 days later, sensors detected a massive energy surge at the edge of the Noxar system. The human fleet had arrived, bypassing every defensive line as if they weren't even there. But instead of launching an all-out assault on the capital world, a single shuttle descended toward the Imperial Palace. The hegemony defense systems remained dark, their operators too afraid to fire, knowing the likely response. In his throne room, surrounded by the remnants of his once mighty council, Emperor Na-Ven prepared to face humanity's judgment. He had lived for nearly 1,000 years through advanced technology and genetic enhancements. He had seen countless species bow before the hegemony's might. He had never imagined his rule might end like this, at the hands of beings he had considered barely worth noticing just weeks ago. "They've landed in the central courtyard," a guard reported, his voice unsteady. "They're requesting your presence, Your Luminance." Na-Ven straightened his ceremonial robes. "If I must face destruction," he said to his advisors, "I will do so as Emperor." But as he walked toward the courtyard to meet the human delegation, he couldn't help wondering if the empire he had ruled for centuries had ended the moment a patrol ship fired on a child collecting rocks on a distant border world. The Imperial courtyard fell silent as Emperor Na-Ven approached the human shuttle. His elaborate robes, woven with precious metals and embedded with gems from 1,000 conquered worlds, seemed excessive and hollow now. The shuttle's door slid open with a soft hiss, and Na-Ven braced himself for armored soldiers, weapons raised. Instead, a middle-aged couple stepped out first. They wore simple clothing, practical travel attire rather than military uniforms or diplomatic finery. The woman's eyes were red-rimmed, and the man's face carried deep lines of grief. Behind them came two human officials in formal Earth uniforms. Na-Ven recognized the couple immediately from intelligence briefings. Min and Su-Ha, parents of the child whose death had brought the mighty hegemony to its knees. No words were exchanged. As they walked toward him, the Emperor found himself unable to meet their eyes. For the first time in his centuries-long life, he felt something approaching shame. "Do you know who we are?" Su asked, her voice quiet but steady. Na-Ven nodded. "You are the parents of Jin-Ha." "A child who was collecting rocks for a school project," Min said. His voice wasn't angry, just exhausted, as if the grief had hollowed him out. A 12-year-old girl who never harmed anyone. Around them, Imperial guards stood frozen, torn between their duty to protect the Emperor and the knowledge that any aggressive move would bring immediate destruction from the human fleet in orbit. One of the human officials stepped forward, introducing herself as Earth's appointed representative. "Emperor Na-Ven, we come with terms, not for surrender but for transformation." Inside the Grand Imperial Hall, the terms were presented. The human delegation sat at the ancient negotiation table, where for millennia, conquered species had signed away their freedom. Now the hegemony found itself on the unfamiliar side of the arrangement. First, the Earth representative began, the immediate dismantling of all border death protocols throughout hegemony space. No more automated killing of civilians who accidentally cross boundaries. Na-Ven's advisors shifted uncomfortably, but none dared object. Second, reparations to all species who have suffered under these protocols, not in wealth or resources, but in freedom. "Any world wishing to leave the hegemony will be permitted to do so without consequence," an older council member gasped. "That would reduce the empire by half." "An empire built on fear isn't sustainable," Min replied simply. "Jin's death proved that." The third term hit hardest. Those directly responsible for ordering and carrying out the attack on Jin would stand trial, not under human law, but under a new interspecies justice system to be established, with representatives from all affected worlds. As the terms were read, Na-Ven noticed something unexpected. There was no demand for his execution, no call for the destruction of hegemony, worlds, no forced technology transfers or planetary occupations. These humans, with their overwhelming military advantage, were offering a path forward. "Why?" he finally asked. "Why not simply destroy us? You clearly have the power." Su's eyes filled with tears. "Because that's what you would do. And we are." "Not you." Min placed a hand on his wife's shoulder before adding, "Destroying your empire won't bring our daughter back, but ensuring no other parent loses their child to senseless violence, that gives Jin's death meaning." Through a nearby window, Na-Ven could see his citizens gathered in the streets below, waiting to learn their fate. The hegemony had ruled through fear for so long that the Emperor had forgotten any other way existed. "And if we refuse these terms?" he asked, already knowing the answer. The Earth representative gestured toward the sky. "The fleet above has targeted every military installation on this planet. We would prefer not to use force, but we will if necessary." Na-Ven closed his eyes. Briefly, "There is something I don't understand. Your technology, how did you advance so quickly after the incident?" "We didn't," the human admiral replied. "Most of these technologies existed in theoretical form or early prototypes. We had restricted their development, fearing what might happen if they fell into the wrong hands or were deployed without proper safeguards." "Then why—" "Because you killed a child," Min interrupted, his voice breaking. "Because Jin's death united us in a way nothing ever has before. The moral restrictions we placed on ourselves, they meant nothing compared to protecting our children." As discussions continued into the night, Na-Ven found himself drawn to the grieving parents. During a brief recess, he approached them in a quiet corner of the hall. "I have ruled for centuries," he admitted, "yet I have never understood the bond." between parent and child. Our species delegates nurturing to specialized caretakers. Su looked at him with a mixture of pity and disbelief. Then perhaps that explains why your empire could so casually murder a child. The emperor had no response. By morning the agreement was ready. Narven, realizing the inevitability of change, signed without further protest. As word spread throughout the capital, something unexpected happened. Instead of panic or rebellion, a sense of cautious relief emerged. Many hegemony citizens, it seemed, had grown tired of living in an empire built on fear. In the weeks that followed, the transformation began. Border outposts dismantled their automated defense systems. Colonial worlds held their first free elections. Former military officers responsible for Jin's death were brought before the newly formed Justice Council. The human fleet remained in orbit around key hegemony worlds, not as conquerors, but as guardians of the transition. Captain Park, watching from the bridge of the Defiant, found himself reflecting on the strange path that had brought them here. "I expected to feel different," he confessed to Admiral Lee. "Victory should feel more satisfying." The Admiral nodded. "This isn't victory in the traditional sense. It's something more important." 6 months after the signing, Min and Su returned to New Horizon. A memorial had been established at the spot where Jin had been collecting her rock samples. As they approached, they were surprised to find hundreds of beings from across the galaxy, former subjects of the hegemony, gathered in quiet reflection. At the center stood a simple stone column with Jin's image. Around its base, visitors had placed rocks of all shapes, sizes, and colors, gathered from worlds throughout the galaxy. A physical reminder that curiosity should be protected, not punished. Min knelt to examine the collection. Among them, he noticed an unusually shaped crystal that seemed to glow from within. Attached was a small note in elegant script. "From Noxar, may her light guide us to be better than we were." It was signed simply Narven. As Min and Su prepared to return to Earth, they were approached by a young hegemony girl and her caretaker. The child held out a carefully wrapped package. "This is soil from 1,000 worlds," the caretaker explained. "Worlds that are free now because of your daughter. We thought you might want to take it home." Su accepted the gift with trembling hands. That night, in their temporary quarters, she and Min scattered a small portion of the soil in a garden box and planted a flowering bush native to New Horizon. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Su asked, watching as Min gently watered the freshly planted soil. Accepting their terms instead of demanding more? Min looked up at the night sky, where stars shone brightly, each potentially home to beings who would never know the fear the hegemony had once inspired. "Jin always saw the best in everyone," he said quietly, "even when they didn't deserve it. I think she would be proud that we found a way to honor her without becoming what we fought against." As they sat together in the quiet garden, a shooting star streaked across the sky, brilliant and brief like their daughter's life. But unlike Jin's time, which had been cut cruelly short, its light spread outward, touching everything in its path before fading into memory.